Hello, my lovely bunch of Year 2 bananas. Today, in English, it's another learn together thing. So tell mum or dad or auntie or whoever, say bye, see you later. Don't need you right now. I'm with Mr. Scullion and everybody else in Year 2. No, it's all right. Bye-bye. No, cup of tea. Go and have a cake or a biscuit or something. No, don't need you. Today, you're going to leave those grown-ups who've been helping you out. They're going to have their own peace and quiet. You know how to pause a YouTube video, so this should be absolutely fine. You can stick around with me. That does mean that they won't be standing there next to you saying, no, you've got to get this done. No, that's my job. I'd really like to see everybody's English completed after today. All right? If you're finding it's tricky and it's taking a long time, that's okay. Pause it, come back to it a little bit later. But you've got to be resilient, like the turtle. I know you can do this because we're building on what we did yesterday, and I'm here to help. We were looking at run-on sentences. Those sentences where people have squashed them together when they should have a conjunction or a full stop. Loved seeing people's writing yesterday, where some people chose to use full stops and other people chose to use conjunctions like and, but, so, or because, if, and when. I was really impressed with people's writing yesterday. I'm going to make it a tiny bit trickier today, but I am going to say we're only using full stops. We're not going to add in any conjunctions. We're only going to spot where we can use full stops today. Run-on sentences, all about Mr. and Mrs. Twit. Let's have a look. The first one's hiding underneath the grey. I'm going to read the sentence a couple of times. Then you can pause the video and you can rewrite it, making sure you put full stops in the right place. Then I'll rewrite it and we'll see if you put your full stops in the same place as me. So before we start, make sure you've got your English book, a pencil, and a really positive attitude. If you need to go and get those things, pause the video now, come back as soon as you're ready. While you're doing that, I'm going to have a quick drink of water because I've talked a lot on these videos this morning. Thanks for waiting. Okie dokie. Underneath the grey, we've got sentences about the horrible twits. Let's see what it has to say. Oh, okay, hopefully you can read this. And I'm going to read it with you. Mr. Twit was nasty. He had food in his beard. He played tricks on Mrs. Twit. Right, I'm going to read it again. There are definitely full stops missing, but this time, this isn't two sentences stuck together. It's actually three sentences stuck together. Mr. Twit was nasty. He had food in his beard. He played tricks on Mrs. Twit. Can you spot where the full stops need to go? Mr. Twit was nasty. He had food in his beard. He played tricks on Mrs. Twit. If you're feeling confident, write this sentence now, but put in those full stops so that it's actually three sentences. Pause the video and write it yourself now. If you've written it yourself, brilliant, let's have a look to see if you were right. If you're writing it with me, let's do it together now. Capital N for Mr. It's one of our Year 2 tricky words. Mr. Washing line join for my Mr. Capital T for Twit. It is his name. Twit. Mr. Twit was nasty. Full stop. That's our first one in there. Mr. Twit was nasty. Sentence on his own. Okay, I'm going to move to this side. I've put my full stop, so I need to remember something else for the next word. He, back over here, had, he had food, oo, washing line for our oo, food, in his beard. Right, that's an again with a washing line. Full stop. Well done if you spotted that one. He had food in his beard. Mr. Twit was nasty. Full stop. Let's change this to a capital. He had food in his beard. Full stop. Let's change that to a capital. He played tricks on Mrs. Twit, and that's our third and final sentence. So again, he played tricks. Washing line joined for my He played tricks on capital M for Mrs. Washing line capital T for Twit. And a full stop. Let's look at this completed sentence together. Mr. Twit was nasty. Full stop. He had food in his beard. Full stop. He played tricks on Mrs. Twit. Full stop. This big run-on sentence is now 3 perfect sentences. Well done. If yours doesn't look like mine, change it now so that it does. Pause the video if you need to before I move on to the next one. Okay, we're moving on to the next one. Another run-on sentence. We need to spot where those full stops go, and we need to write those proper sentences in our English book. I'll read, and you can join in. Mrs. Twit was ugly, she was mean, she hit people with her stick. I'll read it again. Mrs. Twit was ugly, she was mean, she hit people with her stick. Think about where you believe those full stops should go. If we were in class, we do think, pair and share. But at the moment, you're sitting at home with a YouTube video and Mr. Scullion. So you've just got to think for yourself. Mrs. Twit was ugly, she was mean, she hit people with her stick. This time I'm going to edit this one and give you time to rewrite the sentences properly. Before I do that, if you're feeling confident, pause the video and write it yourself now. Mrs. Twit was ugly. Full stop. Capital S. That's our first sentence. Makes sense on its own. She was mean. Full stop. Capital S. She hit people with her stick. Before I write it, I'm just going to check that it makes sense. Mrs. Twit was ugly. She was mean. She hit people with her stick. I'm really happy with my edits, so I'm going to write that sentence now. Mrs. Twit. I do want to see everybody doing their best presentation in their books. Writing's on the line, and I'm joining where I can. Mrs. Twit was ugly. Now today you have all of the spelling words you need. Full stop. She, you can probably fit in was. Yes, she was mean. Full stop. She hit people with her stick. She hit people with her stick. Now Now I'm going to read it one more time to make sure my sentences are accurate. Mrs. Twit was ugly. Does it make sense? Yes. She was mean. Does it make sense? Yes. She hit people with her stick. Does it make sense? Yes. It's not a nice thing to do, but it does make sense. Make sure yours looks like mine in your English book. Pause the video if you need to. I'm going to move on to the next example. If you're feeling confident, read the sentence to yourself, pause the video and try and write it here without my help with any of the edits. You can pause the video now. If you've paused and you've written the sentences, I'm about to show everybody what it should look like. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. He ate them. He didn't know they were worms. I'm going to read it again. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. He ate them. He didn't know they were worms. One more time. Where do you think the full stop should go? Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. He ate them. He didn't know they were worms. Even missing a full stop at the end. Okay, I'm going to run my finger along and you tell me when to stop for the first one. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. He ate them. He didn't know they were worms. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. Full stop after worms. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. Blech. But it is a sentence that makes sense on its own. This one's a bit trickier. He ate them, he didn't know they were worms. Think to yourself, where does that full stop go? He ate them, he didn't know they were worms. He ate them, full stop, right at the end there, which means this one is our capital letter. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms, full stop. He ate them, full stop. He didn't know they were worms. Oh, good use of didn't though. Excellent contraction. Now we've got 3 sentences. I can write them in my best handwriting. If you haven't done that yet, pause the video and do that now. My turn to write as well. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. Blech! That wormy spaghetti. Full stop. He ate them. Now, on another day, we could use, instead of a full stop, another piece of punctuation here. He ate them! It's surprising and disgusting. We could have used an exclamation mark, but I did say only full stops today. He didn't know they were worms. Capital H, he didn't. Did, apostrophe, then I'm going to dot my I. Didn't know, tricky word with a silent K. He didn't know they, making sure it's an EY, they were worms. And it looks like worms. It's another unusual sound. One more time of reading just to make sure. Mrs. Twit gave Mr. Twit worms. He ate them. He didn't know they were worms. Blech. How many examples do we have to go? Oh, 2 more left. I read. If you're feeling confident, pause the video now before I've even read through. You can have a go yourself. Now, there are some people who are still watching who should have paused and started writing. I'm going to read, and then you can have a go if you haven't already. Mr. Twit put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. She fainted. He threw some water on her. This is one of my favourite parts of the story. The dreaded Skiddy Wiggler. Mr. Twit put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. She fainted. He threw some water on her. Let's look at the first part and decide where that full stop needs to go. Mr. Twit put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. She fainted. He threw some water on her. Mr. Twit put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. She fainted. Mr. Twit put a frog. Can you spot where the full stop needs to go? Mr. Twit put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. Full stop. That's the first thing that happened. He put a frog in her bed. That makes sense on its own. So Mr. Twit put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. Full stop. Everybody happy? Happy with this letter? Let's change that to a capital. She fainted. He threw some water on her. She fainted. He threw some water on her. She fainted. He threw some water on her. Where does the full stop need to go? It's a really short sentence here. She fainted. Full stop. Capital H. He threw some water on her. I've done the edits. If you haven't written a sentence already, make sure you do that now. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I would like you to do. So when you send me a photo, I'm going to see these sentences written in your English book. Okay, this can take as long as you need it to, because you can pause the video and catch up as much as you would like to. All right? I'm going to have a little drink of water. If you're pausing the video, you can do that too. Don't spend 10 minutes getting a drink of water. Quick drink, and then back to the home learning. Right, Mr. Twit. Capital N for Mr, capital T for Twit. Mr. Twit, horrible man, put a frog in Mercer's Twit's, and here we go, Mrs. Twit's bed. Mrs. Twit's bed. Who does the bed belong to? Mrs. Twit. Mrs. Twit's bed. Full stop. She fainted. Full stop. He threw some water on her. Why do you think he threw some water on her? Water is a year 2 tricky word. On her. And then a full stop. Mr. Twit put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. She fainted. He threw some water on her. 3 sentences, they all make sense. 1, 2, 3, well done me. When people faint or fall unconscious, sometimes people think it's a good idea to throw water on them to wake them up. It's not a good idea, but Mr. Twit probably used it as an excuse to soak Mrs. Twit. And then the frog, or the skillywiggler, was really, really happy because they love water. So he was swimming around and splashing about on Mrs. Twit's head and on her bed sheets, and he's under the sheets. Very funny part of the story. One of my favourite bits. My other favourite bit is coming up after our next example. Oh, this was horrible! Okay, if you're feeling confident, read, decide where the full stops go, and write. Some of you should be pausing the video now. If you haven't paused the video, that's because you need my help, and that's fine. I'll read, you decide where the full stops go. Mrs. Twit put her eye in Mr. Twit's beer. He drank the beer. It was a horrid trick. I'll read it again. This time I'm pointing at each word. Mrs. Twit put her eye in Mr. Twit's beer. He drank the beer. It was a horrid trick. Mrs. Twit put her eye in Mr. Twit's beer. He drank the beer. It was a horrid trick. There are 3 sentences hiding in this big squash to run on. Let's find out where they go. You might have decided already and chosen to pause the video because you can write this yourself. That's brilliant if you have. Mrs. Twit put her eye in Mr. Twit's beer. He drank the beer. It was a horrid trick. My turn to edit. Mrs. Twit put her eye in Mr. Twit's beer. Full stop. Capital letter. You could pause the video and write this part now. Then decide where the next full stop goes. He drank the beer, it was a horrid trick. He drank the beer, it was a horrid trick. Do you know where it goes? If you do, pause the video and write the sentences properly yourself. He drank the beer, full stop, capital I for it was a horrid trick. If you've done that yourself, I'm really, really proud of you. If you've had a go without my help. Now that you've got to this stage and you know where they go, I want you to write these sentences properly in your English book. Pause the video now, or do it at the same time as I'm doing it. Mrs. Twit put her eye, not her real eye, remember she has a glass eye, her eye in Mr. Twit's beer. Aha, some of you, full stop, some of you will have noticed it's Mr. Twit's beer. Why do we have this apostrophe here? Because the beer belongs to Mr. Twit. All right, that's the first sentence. Mrs. Twit put her eye in Mr. Twit's beer. He drank the beer. He drank the beer. The ear. Full stop. Again, if we were doing this another day, this is quite surprising and disgusting. He drank the beer. What could you use instead of a full stop? He drank the beer. You could use an exclamation mark, but today, only full stops. Final sentence. Read it with me. It was a horrid trick. It was a horrid, with special friends in the middle, with lots of washing line joins. Horrid, it was a horrid trick. Full stop. Virtual high fives coming your way. If you finish those sentences, well done. Send me a photo, upload it to your portfolio, and your job for today is almost done. Here is a picture taken from my favourite part of the whole book. Your job is to write 3 sentences, all with full stops, about this picture. Now, you don't have to write the story. You could just write about what you can see in the picture. So those of you who I sit with on a Tuesday or a Friday, and we do sentences about a picture, you could just do 3 sentences like that. Would you like some keywords? Okay, I can give you some keywords to spell that can be quite tricky. The first word I will give you, balloon. If you wanted to change it to balloons, you know what you need to do. Balloon. Okay, the other one I'll give you, stretch. Now, you could have stretching, or stretched. And stretched is quite tricky, so I'll give you the ED ending for stretched if you need it. Any other words that you think you might need? I think you can write string yourself, but you might find that tide is a useful word for your sentences. Or you might find that sky, sky with an unusual I with a Y at the end of a word. You might find that that is a useful word. And then the last one, you know, I think you'll be all right. I think these 4 words might be quite useful. Any others, if you're not sure, sound them out. Remember, we're trying to give our grown-ups a little bit of peace and quiet today. So 3 sentences about this picture using these key words. And then those sentences will help me decide who our stars are going to be for our English feedback tomorrow. 3 sentences. You can use these words if you need to. I look forward to seeing them. Thank you very much, everybody. See you very soon.